Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DaCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Hope you all had a lovely weekend. I know I did. Besides the meeting that went awfully awry, other than that, it was a very nice weekend. Went on some bike rides. It's cool because where I live, you got like these couple little coffee shops that are like kind of right on this bike trail. And so you take your bike out, on a crisp morning, just before the sun's coming up. Not before the sun's coming up, but sun's only been up for a little while, and you're grabbing a coffee and then going on a nice little bike ride. So did that a couple times. Hung out with the lady. Also had basketball, and then drove to Vermont yesterday to get a wedding license, and that's it pretty much. But anyways, today what I want to do is I want to chat about this whole love your brother thing. Now, if you really think about it, Jesus preaches an awful lot about peace, love, and forgiveness, right? It's kind of interesting because that's basically one of his biggest things that he's talking about is forgiveness. Forgive them as your heavenly Father forgave you, and forgive this person, love this person we love this way, or and then there's always the apostles talking about trying to live peaceably with all men if possible, or maintain peace with all men if possible, until they got to that end, that final point. So all these commandments are about peace and keeping the peace and everything. But then, at the end of the story, guess what happens? Jesus, the man who preaches peace, comes back in the form of the Roman armies and murders in cold blood over 1 million Jews, man, woman, and child, in the worst slaughter known to them to date at that time. A brutal and horrific slaughter. A brutal and horrific siege on the city where the accounts are such that the women were so hungry that they were actually eating their children, and stuff along those lines because of lack of food and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's almost as if the love of many was growing cold, like Jesus said in Matthew 24. Go figure, huh? But anyways, so you got this period of absolute horror, and the Romans literally hunt these people down like dogs, slaughtering every one of them. And then, the story on Mount Masada, where they hunted down this remnant of, 1,000 Jews that were hiding out up there and trying to maintain secure borders up there, because it was at the top of a mountain, which I've been to, and that's actually a pretty cool place. But yeah, so horrific slaughter. And according to the story, this is at the hands of Jesus, right? He's the one orchestrating this brutal, horrific slaughter on people, with showing no mercy to them. What's all this talk about love and mercy and forgiving your brother and all this stuff, this peace and love talk, if he's not actually walking it out himself, right? What an example to set. I'm going to come and I'm going to preach peace and love, right? But then 40 years later, I'm also coming back in flaming fire, taking vengeance on those who don't love me. Anyways, so all this talk about peace and love, and then he comes back and brutally murders people. Come on. Really? You couldn't have thought of a better way, the God of all creation, to actually abide by what you were preaching, right? Whatever happened to practice what you preach, man? Forgive a man 77 times and all this stuff, right? Oh, okay. And then just come back and just take the lives of over 1 million people, right? When the funny thing is like, for me anyway, like being in the Christian religion for the 5 or so years that I was, I would kind of read over a lot of things and not really give them any thought and stuff, just because I'm like, it shows you how consumed you can become in a system. And basically everything in that system becomes acceptable in your mind, right? And you justify everything to fit your comfort zone. Like, for instance, reading the account of the slaying of all the firstborn in Egypt. Right? I mean, in any normal human's mind, an event like that would be highly offensive, totally uncalled for, completely grotesque, and just against all things humane. And yet we read right over it and say, yes, our God slaughtered all the firstborn of Egypt for the sake of his holy people. You know, like, what kind of cult is this? You look at these things after you start to come out of it and you say, wow, man, like, there is some god-awful stuff in that Bible, right? Like, what about the commandments where in Deuteronomy, where it talks about the children, right? And it's giving the Mosaic law to the parents and of the children. It says, if your son is a drunkard, right? If he's a drunkard and he's just like lazy, it commands them to drag him out into the middle of the street and stone him to death. Likewise, it talks about the daughters. If your daughter is found out to not be a virgin, it's either if your daughter is found out to not be a virgin, or if your daughter marries a man and then they find out she's not a virgin, one of the two. But anyways, the commandment is to drag her in front of the house and the men will come out and stone her to death. All for, not being a virgin, right? I mean, and it's funny, I brought that up in the little meeting and I said, how is this okay? And they said, well, different times, right? The thing about the different times argument is you can't argue for different times and then say God never changes, right? I mean, if he's the God of all creation, the beginning and the end, his moral standard is never going to change. If all that's the same, then I don't understand why you would think that that's a different time, right? He's still the same God that you're worshiping, a God who commanded men and women to be stoned to death for slipping up, a God who commanded all the firstborn of Egypt to be killed for the sake of his people. All right. I think there could have been a better way to do it, being that he is the God of all creation. He could have just not set his people up for that in the first place, right? We could have backed all this up to the beginning of the story and just said, hey, you know what? I'm not going to do this. This is kind of dumb. Like, why did I create this world that I'm just playing with like it's a bunch of toys? Created it evil, put a tree of knowledge of good and evil, tempted them, allowed these people to fall. Now they're all wretched, vile creatures, and I'm disgusted with them. Until they decide to love me, then they're cool. But everyone who doesn't love me will burn in hellfire. Moo-hoo-ha-ha-ha. I mean, what a silly system to be caught up in. And I think about that when I was caught up in it, and I kind of got out of that whole, like, crazy mindset where it's like everybody's going to burn in hell and be punished and all that. I got out of that quick. I could see that really wasn't the issue or the story pretty quickly, maybe a year and a half in. But you still look at people as if they're, wretched, vile creatures. You can't help it, if you're really absorbed in it, that is. Like, there's a lot of fringe Christians who don't feel that way because they're not very, absorbed in it. They kind of just have, that side dish Christianity that you kind of add to your life. But anyways, where was I? So this God of the Bible does some pretty crazy stuff. He pushes people off the land and kills them, man, woman, and child. And I brought that up too about the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Amorites. And the pastor's response was, yes, these were wicked, idol-worshipping people. And it's like, yeah, dude, that might be true, okay? But here's the deal. God never declared any laws to anybody but Israel, right? It says it in the Bible. He didn't reveal himself to anyone other than Israel. So by you calling these people wicked idolaters who are worshiping false gods, it's kind of pointless because God didn't reveal himself to them. So how are they supposed to know who God is as a person, who is what his righteous standard is, what his laws are, if he doesn't declare them to anyone other than Israel? And as for his judgments, the nations do not know them. That's what the Bible says. Nobody else had his laws. So in the days of Israel, when the Bible declares that God had not given his laws to anyone other than them, the Canaanites, the Hivites, the Amorites, all these ites, they're getting kicked off the land and slaughtered, man, woman, and child, according to the story, just so Israel could have their land. And these people justify it by saying, well, they were idolaters. Well, dude, they never had Yahweh to begin with. So what are they to know any better, right? That's like telling somebody that they should have known, a law in the most remote part of Australia. Like, I mean, are you really going to know these laws that are so far away from your culture and your everyday way of being like these ancient cultures would have been? No, not at all. So anyways, he didn't declare his laws, so that's not a good excuse, all right? What it seems to me is that this was a kill and conquer God, a tribal deity who favored his people very much, who had no issue with destroying massive amounts of people for their sake. And then at the end, we see him preaching about love and all this stuff, and then he slaughters 1 million people. So what's going on here? Well, in my opinion, most of the time when Jesus is talking about love your brother, forgive your brother. If he offends you, forgive him. If you hate your brother, the love of God is not in you, that kind of thing. Well, remember, Jesus was the firstborn of the brethren, right? He was the kinsman redeemer. And he came for his own. And so I believe that this is speaking internally. In other words, like, he's sort of like breaking down that enmity, that middle wall between the Jewish Israelite and the Gentile Israelite. And within that context, he's saying, love your brother, because remember now, when you see the epistles and you're looking at Paul's letters, he's constantly trying to break down the barrier wall between the two, right? He's asking the Jews, what advantage are we? Are we better than they? By no means. He's asking the Gentiles, telling them, don't be cocky because you were grafted in, he can just as easily kick you out, that kind of thing. So Paul is kind of like caught in the middle of probably a very prideful circumcision group of Jewish sheep and, Gentiles who are maybe getting a little bit cocky, Gentile sheep, and saying like, yeah, we're in, that kind of thing. So point is he's working to break down that middle wall of separation. Peter says that he would preach peace to those who were near and those who were far off. Ephesians, Paul writes to them saying that Christ came and preached peace to those who were near and peace to you who are far off. In other words, like, hey, he's making peace, right, between the two, bringing the two sticks back together, that sort of thing. And that's what the olive tree sticks are kind of representing as well, that the Israelites, the 12 tribes. So it's a story of restoration of the 12 tribes. So when you see this, don't hate your brother, if you hate your brother, then you're screwed kind of thing, it's falling within the context of that. Now, granted, there are places where they tell them to try to strive to live peaceably with all men, if possible, as they waited for the coming. But again, that's sort of like not really defeating what I'm saying. That's just kind of like an outside detail that they were being instructed to, obey the laws, obey the rulers, and just kind of like live peaceably, and just don't cause too much of a stir, in other words. But so just thought I would kind of bring that up. It's kind of interesting how Jesus preaches peace and love amongst the brethren, and then comes back and slaughters 1 million Jews, right? And now that just kind of shows you that it's contextual, what he's preaching about love your brother, because he wasn't saying like love. In other words, he wouldn't be talking about the whole entire world, love everybody and forgive everybody, if he was coming back to slaughter 1 million people. That just kind of doesn't make sense, right? Why would you preach something like that and then kill them all? It seems like it would have fit more within what he was preaching to just forgive all those Jews and those Pharisees and win them over to God. But no, that didn't really happen. Instead, the opposite happened, and it was a pretty brutal outcome. So that's pretty much it, folks. Love your brother. I think that falls within the context of Israel only. The children of God were being gathered in. The parable of the prodigal son. Again, there's the brother going out, paganized, living amongst the nations, dirty, unclean, and coming back to the Father and receiving mercy. Love your brother, right? In other words, don't hold animosity towards them. And you can see that the Jews know that they're out there. They know that the dispersion is amongst the Greeks, the Gentiles. So they're very well aware of it, But that's pretty much what this one's all about, folks. I got to get jamming here. If you liked it, give it a like. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and remember to keep it kind in the comments. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Hey, folks, one quick thing to add. I was just thinking about, by the way, I'm out of breath because I just rode my bike straight up a death hill. And was just pondering some stuff. But about the brothers and the love your brother, you can just see exactly who that's about by looking in the letter James wrote. James begins his letter writing to the 12 tribes of Israel scattered abroad. Greetings, my brethren. Brethren. It's right there, folks. The brethren, always in the story, are referring to the Israelites. And you can see that back in places like, is it Exodus maybe, where Moses, or maybe Genesis, where Moses breaks up the fight between the Israelites while they're in bondage. And he says, you guys are brethren, or you guys are brothers. You know, you shouldn't be doing this. But basically, whenever the term brethren is used in the New Testament, we've been trained to turn it into a spiritual brethren. Like, you know, anybody can be brothers. But really, in context, the story's not saying that. It's talking about the literal Israelites. Those were the brethren. So anyways, that's all I wanted to add, folks. I hope you have a good one. Remember, be kind in the comments. Give it a like, and I'm going to go pass out. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.